5 prison escapes during World War II did more than free a handful of men. They exposed tiny gaps that forced entire security systems to change. What happened inside those walls, and why did those moments reshape modern confinement standards? The answers begin with a night no one was to survive. Number 1. The Auschwitz Commandant car escape. On June 20, 1942, 4 prisoners were held inside Auschwitz, a place designed to erase identity and block every path outward. They were not ordinary detainees. Each had been selected for labor that moved them near storage rooms and vehicle areas. The camp stood in occupied Poland, surrounded by fences, watchtowers, and armed patrols. From the outside, it appeared sealed by routine and fear. From the inside, it operated through schedules and visible authority. Every movement depended on uniform signals and expected behavior. These men understood that escape did not begin with running. It began with learning how the place pretended to be unbreakable. If escape could happen here, then the idea of secure confinement would collapse. Auschwitz relied on layers of control. Gates were locked, roads were watched, and guards rotated on fixed schedules. The central road passed directly through the main entrance, where vehicles were inspected by routine rather than suspicion. The command structure mattered more than the walls. Anyone who appeared to belong was rarely questioned. Uniforms carried power and vehicles moved as symbols of order. Weather played a role too. Summer light kept the camp visible but also predictable. The distance from the inner barracks to the outer gate required several minutes of walking under observation. The system assumed that no one inside could convincingly become someone in charge. The design trusted recognition over verification. It worked because it had never been challenged, but only one habit needed to fail. The prisoners noticed something small. Vehicles belonging to senior officers were treated differently. They were waved through with minimal inspection. Drivers were rarely asked to explain their cargo or their route. One prisoner worked near the motor pool and observed how keys were stored and how uniforms were hung. Another learned the rhythm of guard changes near the vehicle shed. The gap was not in the fence, but in the role of the driver. The camp watched bodies, not behavior. The men could not leave their block freely, but they could move inside work zones. A single moment of misrecognition could turn access into passage. Leaving the building would not mean leaving the camp, but it would test whether authority could be worn like clothing. Preparation unfolded over weeks. They collected pieces of clothing and hid them in work areas. They memorized phrases used by officers and practiced posture and tone. Tools were returned carefully to avoid questions. Any missing object would bring a search. Every step required patience. Guards performed random checks without warning. A single discovery would end everything. The men avoided drawing attention by keeping their work routine unchanged. Their plan depended on timing and confidence rather than speed. The larger the plan became, the more fragile it felt. They knew that escape required looking ordinary. If inspection came that day, the attempt would die before it began. The largest obstacles were not walls, but people. Guards moved unpredictably during shift changes. Other prisoners might speak without knowing the risk. Weather could slow movement or draw notice. The vehicle itself could fail to start. Even the sound of an engine could summon attention. They also faced distance beyond the gate. Roads led through areas controlled by patrols. Leaving the camp did not mean reaching safety. It meant entering open territory without protection. They had no documents that would survive careful review. Their only defense was performance. If they exited the gate, they would still be exposed. If they stayed inside, the chance would vanish. If they left, where would survival begin? Late in the afternoon, they moved. They changed into uniforms taken from storage and entered the vehicle area. One took the driver's seat. The others positioned themselves as guards. The engine started without delay. As the vehicle rolled forward, 2 guards looked up from their posts. One raised his hand to signal the gate. A voice ordered the barrier lifted. The sound matched what the guards expected to hear. A brief pause followed while the gate opened. Another guard stepped closer, but the vehicle continued forward. The moment stretched. If anyone asked for papers, the act would collapse. The barrier lifted fully and the road cleared. They crossed the line between controlled space and open land. But leaving the gate did not mean leaving danger. Within hours, the absence was noticed. A vehicle was missing. Uniforms were unaccounted for. Guards were questioned. Patrols were sent along nearby roads. The trail was thin. The prisoners had moved quickly and changed appearance after leaving. Reports conflicted about direction and time. No body was found. No clear border crossing was confirmed. The system knew something had broken, but did not know how. The The men had passed through the most guarded exit without force. Their disappearance became a puzzle rather than a conclusion. The camp searched outward, but the proof of escape remained uncertain. Where had they gone? After the incident, procedures changed. Vehicles were inspected regardless of rank. Uniforms were locked and counted. Roles were no longer trusted by sight alone. The escape showed that control built on habit could be worn like a mask. It was not a story of speed or strength. It was a story of systems failing to question their own signals. The event forced authorities to revise how movement and identity were checked. It became a lesson about routine blindness. The walls had not failed, the rules had. And if one camp could be crossed this way, how many others still believed their gates could never open? Number 2. The Great Escape at Stalag Luft Three. On the night of March 24 into March 25, 1944, Allied airmen were held inside a prisoner camp built on sandy soil in German-controlled territory. The site was chosen because digging tunnels was supposed to be impossible. The prisoners were officers trained to resist capture, not ordinary laborers. Their days were filled with roll calls, inspections, and careful observation by guards. The camp sat far from major cities, surrounded by forests and rail lines that led deeper into enemy land. From the outside, it looked like a model of order. From the inside, it felt like a test of patience. The men believed that staying meant being erased from the war. Leaving meant risking everything. If escape worked here, the idea of total control would be questioned. The camp relied on structure rather than force alone. Barracks stood in neat rows. Guard towers watched every open space. Searchlights moved across the yard at night. Patrols followed strict schedules. The soil itself was part of the defense. Sand collapsed easily and left clear traces on shoes and clothing. Tunnels could not be hidden without careful planning. Distance was another barrier. The nearest rail station lay many miles away. The weather in late winter remained cold and damp. Any movement outside at night meant crossing open ground under the moon. The system depended on routine and repetition. The guards believed that every pattern could be predicted and every risk measured. The camp was not designed for surprise, but habit can be learned by those who watch long enough. The prisoners noticed the guards trusted the layout more than their own eyes. Barracks inspections focused on beds and lockers, not on the ground beneath them. One barrack had a stove placed in a position that blocked part of the floor from view. Another had a wall close to the fence line. The men began to track guard movement by sound and by time. They counted steps, noted pauses, and marked where light reached and where it did not. The gap was not in the fence, but in the belief that digging would always be detected. Sand taken from below could be spread in small amounts during exercise periods. Clothes could be altered to hide extra weight. A single idea grew into a network of effort. Leaving the barrack would not mean leaving the camp, but it would test whether silence could defeat structure. Preparation became a second life. Tools were made from scraps of wood and metal. Air ducts were taken apart piece by piece to support tunnel walls. Blankets were cut into strips to make ropes and ladders. Papers were forged using ink mixed from stolen materials. Civilian clothing was sewn from uniforms altered by hand. Everything had to be hidden before inspections. Sand was carried out in small bags tied under trousers and released slowly in the yard. Any unusual pile would raise suspicion. The work lasted for months. Every night someone listened for footsteps while others dug in darkness. The danger was constant. A sudden search could end the project in seconds. The men understood that success depended on doing nothing that looked like change. If one mistake happened, the plan would disappear with it. The obstacles grew heavier as the date approached. Guard rotations changed without warning. Weather turned colder, making movement slower and louder. Some men became ill and could not take part. Supplies ran low. The tunnel had to reach beyond the fence line, but the soil shifted and threatened to collapse. Air inside became thin. Candles burned weakly and filled the space with smoke. Time pressed harder each day. Transfer orders were rumored, meaning the camp might be moved. The men faced a choice between acting early or waiting for better conditions. Leaving the tunnel unfinished meant failure. Waiting too long meant discovery. Even if they reached open ground, travel without clear papers would invite capture. Escape did not promise safety. It promised only a different kind of risk. If they went out, where would they survive? Near midnight, the signal was given. A small opening under the barrack floor was uncovered. One man slid into the tunnel and began to crawl. The space allowed only one person at a time. Each carried a small bag with food and papers. The line moved slowly. Snow had fallen, and the exit hole lay just short of the forest edge. One man reached the surface and froze when a guard walked past the tunnel mouth without noticing it. Another dropped his bag and had to return for it. The wait grew longer. Dawn approached. A noise from above caused the tunnel to fall silent. The risk of discovery increased with every minute. Turning back would expose the opening. Moving forward meant racing daylight. Leaving the tunnel did not mean leaving danger. When morning came, the absence was discovered. Barracks were searched. The tunnel was found. Sirens sounded across the camp. Trains and roads were watched. Patrols followed footprints in the snow. Some men were caught within hours. Others vanished into towns and forests. Reports described sightings, but no certainty. The camp knew that many had escaped, but could not say where they were. For days, the system hunted for answers. Some trails ended in stations. Others disappeared at road crossings. The outcome was uneven and incomplete. The escape was neither full success nor total failure. It was a challenge to control itself. The question was not how many left, but how the camp allowed so many to try. Where did they go? After the event, rules changed. Barracks were raised above the ground. Floors were inspected regularly. Sand was counted and measured. Movement inside was limited. Guard patterns became irregular. The escape proved that long routines invite study. It showed that confinement depends not only on walls, but on attention. The system had assumed that effort would be visible. It had not planned for patience. This was not just a story of men crawling through earth. It was a lesson about time-defeating design. The camp did not fall because of weakness. It fell because it trusted its own methods too much. And if one place built for control could be mapped this way, how many others still believed their ground could never be crossed? Number 3, the Cowra Breakout in Australia. On the night of August 5th, 1944, several hundred Japanese prisoners were held inside a detention camp near the rural town of Cowra in New South Wales. They had been captured in battles across the Pacific and transported far from the front lines. The camp was built on open land, surrounded by fences and guard towers, and separated from nearby farms by wide fields. These prisoners were not ordinary captives. Many had been trained to view surrender as dishonor. Life inside the camp followed strict routines of roll calls, meals, and work details. From the outside, the site appeared quiet and orderly. From the inside, tension grew with every passing week. If escape could occur here, then even distance and isolation would not guarantee control. The camp relied on space and routine as its main defenses. Fences formed clear boundaries. Watchtowers overlooked open ground. Guards patrolled in predictable paths. The nearest town was several miles away, and the surrounding land offered little cover. Nights were cold and dark with wind moving across the plains. The prisoners were housed in separate compounds, divided by wire and wooden posts. The system assumed that isolation itself was protection. There were no high walls or thick stone barriers. Instead, there was distance visibility and expectation of compliance. The authorities believed that the prisoners would avoid desperate actions because survival depended on calm behavior. The design trusted that discipline would come from order, but it only took one belief to fail for the whole structure to shake. The prisoners noticed something the system did not fully consider. Their group was large, and their shared outlook created unity. Guards were few compared to the number inside the compounds. Night patrols focused on the perimeter rather than the interior. Alarm systems depended on observation rather than machines. The gap was not a weak fence, but the assumption that captives would remain passive. The men studied the timing of lights and the movement of guards. They spoke quietly about running at the same moment, overwhelming control by numbers rather than stealth. The camp watched individuals, not the crowd. Leaving the barracks would not mean leaving the camp, but it would test whether force of will could break routine. Preparation happened in secret. Prisoners hid simple tools made from everyday materials. They gathered pieces of wood and cloth to protect their bodies from wire and cold. Signals were arranged using whispered messages and small gestures. The plan depended on surprise rather than disguise. Any early discovery would bring punishment and tighter rules. Guards entered compounds without warning, and searches were possible at any time. The prisoners had to appear calm while preparing for action. Every movement had to blend with daily life. The longer the plan grew, the more dangerous it became. They knew that escape would not be quiet. It would be sudden and visible. If a search happened before the chosen night, everything would end at once. The greatest obstacles were human and natural at the same time. Guards carried weapons and could call for help. Barbed wire could tear skin and clothing. Darkness could hide movement, but also cause confusion. Some prisoners were weak from illness and hunger. Others feared what would happen if they failed. Outside the fence, the land offered little shelter and no clear direction. Roads led to farms and towns where strangers would be noticed. Even if they crossed the fence, they would still face distance, cold, and patrols. Leaving the compound did not mean reaching safety. It meant stepping into open ground without guidance. If they ran, where would they go? Shortly before dawn, the signal was given. Groups rushed forward at once, shouting to create confusion. Some cut through wire while others climbed over it. Guards heard the noise and turned toward the compounds. One tower sent an alert. Shots were fired into the air as warning. The prisoners continued moving, spreading out across the fields. Some fell at the fence. Others reached open land. The scene lasted only minutes but felt much longer. The darkness filled with movement and sound. The guards tried to hold positions while calling for support from nearby units. The prisoners did not slow. They moved with urgency rather than caution. Crossing the fence did not mean escape. It meant beginning a chase. By daylight, the absence was clear. The compounds were partly empty. Patrols searched fields, roads, and farm buildings. Tracks led in many directions. Some prisoners were found near the camp. Others moved farther into the countryside. Reports came in from nearby towns and farms. The trail was scattered and uneven. Some were taken back quickly. Others were located days later. The system recorded numbers, but could not explain how such a large movement had begun at once. The camp became a center of investigation rather than confinement. The event left questions rather than closure. The escape was not a clean break. It was a challenge to authority itself. Where had they gone? Afterward, policies changed. Camps holding large groups were reorganized. Guard numbers increased. Night patrols became more irregular. Barriers were reinforced, and alarms were improved. Officials began to study group behavior instead of only individual conduct. The breakout showed that control based on calm assumptions could collapse under shared intent. It was not a story of hidden tunnels or clever disguise. It was a lesson about numbers and belief. The camp failed, not because it lacked fences, but because it underestimated motivation. The event reshaped how prisoners were managed and watched. It proved that security is not only about distance and wire, it is about understanding what people might do when they no longer accept waiting. And if one isolated camp could be shaken this way, how many others still trusted silence more than vigilance? Number 4, the Colditz Castle escapes. In the spring of 1941, Allied officers were transferred to a medieval fortress in Saxony known as Colditz Castle, a place reserved for prisoners who had already tried to escape from other camps. The castle sat on a hill above a river with thick stone walls, narrow windows, and a single main gate. These men were not ordinary captives. They were pilots, commanders, and planners who had already challenged confinement. The location was chosen because it looked impossible to cross without help from outside. From the outside, the fortress appeared timeless and sealed. From the inside, it felt like a puzzle made of corridors and towers. The prisoners believed that if movement could be mastered here, then the meaning of secure confinement would change. Colditz relied on height and habit. The walls rose above the valley, and patrols moved along fixed routes inside the grounds. Guards checked doors at regular hours and counted heads during roll calls. Windows were barred and roofs were watched from towers. The distance from the inner rooms to the outer slope required careful passage through gates and courtyards. The weather often brought fog and cold wind, making observation difficult at certain hours. The system trusted stone and routine more than flexibility. The guards believed that the castle itself did most of the work. They did not expect careful study from those inside. The design assumed that strength would discourage patience. But patience only needed one weak rhythm to become strategy. The prisoners noticed that the castle followed predictable patterns. Certain staircases were used only during meals. Certain rooms were entered only during inspections. Some storage areas were rarely checked. One group observed that laundry traveled from upper floors to lower yards without close watch. Another noticed that workshops received materials that could be reshaped. The gap was not in the walls, but in the flow of daily life. The men learned which doors opened together and which bells marked change. They learned where light reached and where shadows stayed. Leaving a cell would not mean leaving the castle, but it would test whether observation could defeat stone. Preparations stretched across months. Maps were drawn from memory of nearby roads and villages. Civilian clothing was sewn from blankets and curtains. Tools were shaped from scraps found in workshops. Paper was saved and pressed to make passes that looked official at a glance. Every item had to be hidden before inspections. Searches came without warning. A missing piece of cloth could bring questions. The men spread their work across different rooms to avoid patterns. They trained themselves to walk like local workers and to stand without appearing hurried. The plan depended on quiet discipline. The larger the effort grew, the more fragile it felt. They knew that one careless moment would turn planning into proof. The obstacles were many. Guards changed posts without notice. Weather could hide sound, but also hide mistakes. Some routes required passing through open courtyards under windows. Materials wore out and had to be replaced. A single broken ladder could end a route. Beyond the walls, the countryside was unfamiliar and full of checkpoints. Rivers and roads crossed open land where strangers would stand out. Even if they crossed the gate, travel without clear identity would draw attention. Escape did not promise freedom. It promised movement into a world that watched closely. If they stepped outside, where would safety begin? One early attempt focused on a rope made from blankets lowered from a window at night. The drop was long and the wind pushed the line away from the wall. A guard passed beneath the window and paused listening. The men froze in darkness. The rope was pulled back slowly and hidden. Another plan used a hidden door cut into a wall behind a wardrobe. The opening led to a stairwell used only by staff. Shoes were muffled with cloth to quiet steps. A guard crossed the stair without looking up, missing the shadow of a man, pressed against the stone. The risk grew with every try. Each movement taught the castle where to look. Leaving a room did not mean leaving danger. When a later escape succeeded, the absence was discovered during the next count. Rooms were searched. Tools were found. Windows were examined. Patrols were sent along the river and into nearby towns. Reports arrived from roads and stations. Some men were seen in borrowed coats and hats. Others vanished into forests and villages. The fortress knew that its reputation had been broken, but did not know how. The trail led outward and then disappeared. The castle remained, but its certainty did not. The question was not how many attempts had failed. It was how one had worked. Where had they gone? Afterward, the system changed. Rooms were reassigned to break familiar routes, storage areas were locked and inventoried. Patrols became irregular. Workshops were limited. Movement between sections required closer checks. The lesson was not about one rope or one door. It was about habit becoming visible. The castle had trusted its age and height. It had not expected study from within. The escapes showed that time favors the observer, not the wall. Confinement failed when routine became readable. Colditz became a symbol not of strength, but of challenge. And if a fortress built for centuries could be mapped this way, how many modern places still believed that stone alone could hold intention? Number 5. Operation Jericho at Amiens prison. On February 18, 1944, several hundred prisoners were held inside a stone facility in northern France, a place designed to isolate and contain people accused of resisting occupation. The prison stood near open fields and railway lines with thick walls and narrow windows facing inward. Many inside were not common offenders, but members of underground networks, and civilians suspected of helping them. The building represented authority and fear at the same time. From the outside, it looked solid and distant. From the inside, it felt sealed by rules and routine. The prisoners believed that once taken there, the world beyond had closed. If escape could happen from this place, then even the idea of walls as protection would be questioned. The prison relied on structure and distance. High stone walls formed a closed rectangle around inner yards. Iron doors separated wings and cells. Guards followed fixed paths between towers and gates. Search routines happened at the same hours each day. The nearest civilian buildings stood far enough away to keep sound from spreading clearly. The winter air carried wind and rain across the fields, making the area feel empty and controlled. The system trusted stone more than flexibility. It assumed that danger could only come from inside. Every defense pointed inward toward the prisoners. The design never imagined that the sky itself could become part of the problem. The prison believed it was hidden from sudden interference. That belief became its weakness. Outside the walls, planners noticed something different. The prison's position made it visible from the air, and its yards lay close to the outer wall. The structure that protected it from escape also made its shape easy to identify. Guard patterns were known through observation. The time of morning inspections was predictable. The gap was not in the door or the fence, but in the direction of threat. All attention pointed toward the ground. No one expected the walls themselves to be opened from above. The idea did not come from those inside, but from those watching from afar. Leaving a cell would not mean leaving the prison, but breaking a wall would change what confinement meant. Preparation took place beyond the prison, rather than within it. Flight paths were studied. The shape of the building was traced from photographs and reports. The goal was not to destroy the structure, but to open it. The timing had to match the moment when prisoners would be gathered in areas close to the yard. Weather had to allow low movement without drawing attention from afar. Any mistake could harm those inside or miss the wall entirely. The plan depended on precision rather than speed. If the opening was too small, it would fail. If it was too large, it would create chaos without direction. The larger the plan became, the thinner the margin for error. If conditions changed that morning, everything would collapse before it began. The obstacles were unlike those of ordinary escapes. Guards could not be distracted by noise inside the prison because the event would come from above. Air defenses could respond if the approach was noticed too early. Clouds could block vision. Wind could push machines off course. The walls themselves could absorb impact in ways that were hard to predict. Inside, prisoners might not understand what was happening and remain in place. Even if the wall opened, reaching open ground would still mean crossing yards watched by armed guards. Leaving a cell would not mean leaving danger. It would mean running through confusion. If the wall opened, where would safety be? Late in the morning, the sound arrived first. Aircraft appeared low over the fields, moving fast and close to the ground. Guards looked up too late to react. A section of the outer wall broke open, sending dust and stone into the yard. Doors inside were forced open by shock. Prisoners rushed toward light where there had been only stone. Guards ran toward the noise, unsure where the threat came from. Another opening appeared near a different wing. The moment lasted only minutes, but it shattered routine. Smoke and dust filled the air. Some prisoners crossed the yard and reached the broken edge. Others hesitated, unsure if the path was real. Leaving the wall did not mean leaving danger. Within a short time, the alarm spread. Guards called for help from nearby posts. Roads were blocked. Patrols moved outward from the prison in widening circles. The broken wall became a sign rather than an answer. Some prisoners were found near the fields. Others disappeared into villages and hedges. Reports described movement, but not direction. The system knew that its barrier had failed, but could not say how many had crossed it. The prison became a place of search rather than holding. The damage could be seen, but the result could not. The escape did not end with one gate opening. It began with many questions. Where had they gone? After the event, thinking about confinement changed. Prisons and camps were reviewed not only for inner weakness, but for outer exposure. Walls were strengthened with the idea that they might be challenged from above as well as below. Guard routines were altered to reduce predictable gathering points. Buildings were no longer judged only by height and thickness, but by how they appeared from far away. The lesson was not about flight or speed. It was about direction. Control had failed because it watched only one side of the problem. Operation Jericho showed that confinement is not only about keeping people in. It is about understanding every way a barrier can be tested. And if one prison could be opened from the sky, how many others still believed their walls could never be reached? These 5 escapes did not succeed because walls were weak. They happened because routine became visible and trust replaced verification. Each case forced authorities to change how movement, identity, and space were controlled. Gates were strengthened, schedules were broken, and attention shifted from objects to behavior. The lesson is not about daring or luck. It is about systems that forget to question themselves. When control depends on habit, it invites study. When study meets patience, barriers lose meaning. History shows that confinement fails when it stops learning, and any place that believes it cannot be challenged is already preparing failure.